Hi.
Hi.
How are you? Hi.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. You just started now?
Yes,
Huh?
we were having some nice informal chats.
Yes.
Again with a small size today, and because Alexis has come in, I just want to spend like about 5 to 10 minutes walking through all the major concepts till date, and then go the last 15 minutes, I thought that was the most interesting, probably the section that we had where we went through growth diagnostics by country. So we actually used that framework in class, and we were talking about Madagascar, we talked about Pakistan, we were starting to talk about Benin. We actually go down the tree and see what has been the experience in the countries that we're talking about from where students are, and kind of walk us through some of the data and facts that they know. So when you say that that's a high savings rate, what is it exactly? What are the endemic factors for? Okay, so this one, let's make it fun. I mean, it's a misnomer to say cold call because I think we're like all peers and in a community. But let's just go through this stuff again in one by one in just a really informal manner. As this pointer starts working, then I will be able to do it. Oh, I might have to do it from here. It should work now. Okay. Yeah, okay. So this is exactly what we had discussed last time. Oh, and Alexis, does this ring a bell? I feel we were like we were ahead of the syllabus, yes, last time, because we're going through Brazil and we're coming through some of these growth diagnostics today, but it was great to go through the exercise anyways. This is, again, the photograph that you need to keep in mind, along with the first 4 or 5 that we went through for Malthus and for Solo model that we started with, which is the other photograph that we've seen.
The reduction of the
Space.
comparative advantage and like
Structural transformation. Yeah, and then we also saw like birth and death rates, right? So like at the end of this class, again, I look back at business school, I look back at college, and classes, eventually you'll have like 8, 10 mnemonics and visuals you keep in mind, right? There's just so many classes, like 5. You just want to make sure that you don't try and do too much, but there's 8, 10 things that are etched in your memory, and that you're able to explain them simply and clearly every time you see them, right? So this is the best chart at a high level. There's another level chart that talks about growth diagnostics. I don't know if you guys saw the matrix and 4 or 5 kind of boxes in bad finance. You go down and kind of have this next level of detail. But this is at the first level of detail. The argument from Houseman Roderick is that basically the reasons for that a country is not able to grow as fast as others is largely stemmed due to, first of all, low private investment. Okay, that by itself is an assumption, and it's like the first block of believing that this is kind of the first diagnostic umbrella that you want to go. And if it is low private investment, it's broken up by low returns to economic activity, right? It implies that there's some economic activity, but you're getting low returns, either unfairly or because of some other blocks in the market, right? Or there is a high cost of finance, right? And what you want to do, what is the process of growth diagnostics form that we have discussed? What is it about? What are we trying to do?
You're trying to just kind of go down the decision tree to determine what the right path, or sort of to understand the constraints.
Constraints.
Combine.
The
binding constraints, right?
Right.
That's again a word you want to associate with growth diagnostics. If you're going through, like, let's imagine a small country, and you kind of put into the planning commission there. You're thinking in any kind of situation where you're making policy, and you're saying, I want to spur economic growth, right? And my country is not growing as fast as a few other countries are. There's so many things I can do at a macro level, right? But if it's economic growth, which will translate into higher quality of living per capita income, right? Then what are the binding constraints? What are the areas that, by that barrel methodology, where the water is seeping through, so that efforts in other areas is not getting its due reward? See, there's all these things require like some concern, but you want to, through this tree, come down with the main thing, whether it's here, whether it's here, don't even care. To come up with the binding constraint first, to then raise economic quality. These slides will be put up, by the way. Yeah.
Can I ask something just before we get into the buying industries and the growth diagnostics? When I see this scheme, I have a problem with the assumption that the main problem or the reasons for low private investment, or just private investment. Why they don't, the reason should be allow public investment. I mean, most of the investment, when you go back to history and you see, for example, the recovery in many European countries after the Second War, or even here in the States, I think during the Great Depression, part of the investments were public investments. They built more roads and they built more railroads and they built some public-owned factories, and so I know that you didn't make that assumption, but I just wonder the limits of this model.
Yeah, so and I think I see it in two ways. One is that inherent, if you go through that matrix, like infrastructure investment is kind of folded at a lower level of this tree in order to kind of look at like low appropriability, for example. But is it like, it's a chicken and egg thing, kind of. Should you think of public investment to start with, right, as a spur to get the economy in action? I mean, that's kind of, you can argue that's what Obama did, right?
Yeah, that's right.
In general, and is that a higher level factor, or are we assuming here that free markets are the ones that have a long-term kind of, that's a driver of the vehicle in the long term, and that public investment is the temporary solution, and that for sustainability over the long run, there has to be a cycle where where private investment really kind of spurs the economy, right? So is it a fix within one of the sub-branches, or is it, and a higher level question by itself? And if you see in one of the latest slides, when we go through breaking up these growth diagnostics, you kind of start, this is again classical economics, where you start with how much money do households have, how much are they putting into banks, and how much are banks putting into firms. Relative to that, how much are firms returning to banks, how much are banks being able to give back to households. So through that cycle, there's also an assumption that public is external. But clearly, it's kind of, we're starting with kind of what is the status quo to see how you should make a public intervention. And it's more a fix than a starting point in this theory. You're asking why it's not a starting point, right? So it's kind of how the theory is based, but what are your thoughts too on that?
So I think you're just sort of addressing the issue of whether you're talking about private investment, but there's obviously a very big public component to that. And if you're talking about, from my perspective, you're talking about like the macroeconomy, the greater macroeconomy, then you've got to factor in, government spending, investments, consumption. That's a blend of it all. If you're talking about GDP comprised of, I guess
C is equal to
yeah.
What is Y is equal to
Y
what?
is C plus I plus G
Plus I.
and X plus I. That's it.
Yeah.
Plus
Are we all familiar with that?
we don't need to go into that because that's not part of the course, but I just, I think of the banking, when he was going through the banking examples in the last lecture, it was very evident that that's where you're talking about national savings versus investment, that the public demand drive component of that is pretty huge. So, is that what we're trying to ask here?
The point is that it's acknowledged. They've come up with a schematic where they looked at it from a private lens. Should it be a starting point in terms of government investment? But because as you're saying, why, like the government coffers are built in some ways, through the savings of the past year. It's almost like the households are the originators in this theory, in this economic theory. But you'll see in diagnostics, as we go through different countries, you're kind of talking about how to increase investments in infrastructure, provide greater credit and so forth, as solutions down the second level.
Yeah, no, I understand, but the growth diagnostics was modeled, I think, more for the developing countries. And if you see in the developing countries what they are trying to do over now, many times they are trying to attract some foreign investments into the country, so there are private investments available. But
the thing is, like we said, like with these guys with theory, this first level itself is, it's an assumption.
yeah,
right?
I know.
They are basing that most of the issues in countries are due to low private investment. Right? So it's a market-based approach to this theory. Clearly there's another public, spurring approach. Okay, so just one more time, this is kind of what we'd seen before. What determines growth? Just starting at the beginning. Alexis, we went through this. this is kind of when we thought about the fact that income per capita is the best driver of a company's overall well-being. And that typically, according to Mr. Solo, that there's two drivers of income growth. One is the factor accumulation, which is capital, labor, and human capital. And then there's the state of the productivity. This is sort of completely fresh and clear in our minds, right? Okay, this was a classic model of explaining kind of what drives income, and then there was this issue over here of birth and death rates according to Mr. Malcolm's, right? The interplay of birth and death rates and how that has an impact on income per capita. The main thing you want to think about there in the birth and death rates is that non-intuitively in historical times, when there was actually greater income, the birth rates went up, so the per capita income would actually come down. Then we saw, this is the other picture you want to keep in mind with the basic Solo model. Just keep in mind these factors up there. Here we have a good idea that basically as you increase your capital, there is a declining returns to scale in terms of the returns to the capital as well as the savings. But you are also constrained by your population growth over there. Yeah? I'm going through this one, just make sure that this is kind of clear. And we can spend a little more time because you missed some of the sections if you want to go through some of these models too. Next week, I mean, I've had flexible office hours depending on when people, say they're free, because it's hard to find windows. But we can just spend a little bit of time.
So I mean, just very quickly, just like to recap, the more investment in capital, more capital invested, that you're going to reach a peak, and then it's going to decline returns.
Just like the way you think about if you have multiple computers, right? Initially, you need a certain level of computers to make sure everyone has a computer. But when you get two, and there's only one person, you won't use that computer to the highest productivity. Yeah. So that's what Mr. Solo talked about. Then putting these together, this is the birth and death rates too. That we talked about when population grows and when it falls as a function of birth and death rates. Right? Paul, we went through this also in a lot of detail, right?
Yep.
And how that relates to how that comes back down to income per capita. Okay? So remember this in classical economics, again, the more population it went, the less income per capita without an increase in human capital. Because there were fixed resources, land. We also saw in our reading for the economic global health class how kind of the Green Revolution and so forth made sure that Malthus's theory didn't continue into this half of the century.
So this is so because the total number of the GDP is divided amongst the population. More people. So people that have less populated countries have more higher income per capita than.
They'll have lower if there's more people for the same amount of for disproportionate growth in income.
Yeah. Okay.
Then you'll have lower. And it's even more magnified when some of this additional money goes to the richer people to start with. There's even greater income disparities. Yeah. These are all building blocks for what we are right now. I mean, this class, when people say, what is the main thing you get out of this class? They say you learn about growth diagnostics. Okay, but these are all the building blocks getting up to growth diagnostics. Okay. And the structural transformation is the very class-specific and Hausman's theory that was very revolutionary as a factor of understanding growth diagnostics. Okay, so then we had this equation that we saw in terms of technological progress. And then we had this thing about proximate and deep determinants of growth. Again, there was healthy debate as to why these are, some are more proximate and why not. But there's kind of this circle that we had said that initially for income you want to look at the factors and the productivity, the A and the FKH. And then there's also other factors that impact both these building blocks, which is the institution, how well they're integrated, and the geography. Geography, remember we talked about certain countries are just better endowed with land, trade, issues and so forth. So this is macroeconomics, the deeper determinants and the proximate determinants. Concept like number 4. Then we talked a little bit about the relative comparative advantage, and we talked a little bit about XPs and so forth. Again, what is the RCA? And how does that impact structural transformation?
I think it would basically, he talked about was the fact that whatever it is that you're focusing on, whatever product it is that's your mainstay export, what what percentage is that of total export that's done in the world, which just shows the relevance of it and your importance in the market.
Correct. Really nice. So it's basically, it's a measure that says the value of your country's exports in a specific product over the total value of all your exports. That's actually the numerator.
Okay.
Okay, and then the denominator is the total value of all exports of that product in all the countries, divided by the total value of all exports in all countries. So it's going to another level of sophistication just to get at this point, implying what are you good at. I mean that's the basic term. What is your country good at? And then you translate this to when you figure out what your country is good at, how does that map onto the whole product space? They've actually done a product space across every product and done like a whole bunch of approximations between countries. But before that, here's a simplified concept. Some countries have these Lego boxes, right? Some countries have more tools in their Lego box. When you're trying to build Legos, if you have more pieces, then you can build more sophisticated things, right? So a country that has been left behind traditionally, historically has shown that their Lego box was a small one so that they could build only a couple of things. So for example, through this, you can just build that, the motorbike. Right? When you have slightly bigger, then you can build like more things. And this one, we have one that actually allows you to make planes. You kind of take off and then again you grow unequally relative to the other countries. And this was really nicely mapped onto this is just the tools that you have in your box. Okay. And that was then just basically mapped onto the structural transformation map, and then we had this discussion of a person byte also. Yeah.
I have a question. This revealed comparative advantage, how is it different from Ricardo's theory of comparative advantage, the regular comparative advantage?
Oh, it's the same. It's just a measure. It's a measure of it's just called revealed comparative advantage. So because you're actually figuring out how do you measure this. Right? When you say you have comparative advantage in something, what is the formula for it? So it is the same thing.
It's just that there's more sort of market evidence to demonstrate what percentage precisely I think right in the market.
Exactly,
That's revealed, it's revealed by the.
So you get a sense of how much that product is valued in the entire world, which gives you an idea of the value of that product. And then how can you say that I have an advantage in this? Is like how much of that product are you really producing? And how important is that production of that product in your economy? So it captures both these things. Okay, and then again, just this is a beautiful concept to take this thing about a person byte. It's kind of the capabilities that you can get, So, Juan, I know you like this. Just please explain this to us.
I think the issue of person byte maybe sounds confused because it's not a person. It's the capabilities that a country they have in order to the relative compare advantage they have compared to other countries. So, if they, I would say that the more person bytes a country, the more possibility will be for them to be inside the forest when they have so many trees close to them.
And it explains why. I mean, so a lot of countries who really focus on education. So Norway, for example, has a lot fewer people than many other developing countries, and there's a lot of focus on education with a smaller number of people. I mean, they have many more person bytes. So that they are able to climb more, they're just capable of making more products.
More sophisticated.
Correct. Which allows them to compete better in the world space, which kind of spurs their growth.
So it's a relative measure of output, not on a person basis, but on a.
It's output. So for example, if you go to churn out PowerPoint presentations, right? If you have a group of like 10 people who had a lot of experience with PowerPoint and consultants, whatever, they'll be able to churn it out faster, or arguably, that, if you have more, they'll be able to produce more, versus a group of 30 people, right, who's given the same task, but they've never seen PowerPoint before.
Right.
So it's just the capability. When you have that capability, when you have that expertise, you can churn out more work. You can churn it out faster. Okay, so growth diagnostics, again, we have Hausman, Danny Roderick, and Velasco. Mentioned this last time. It's a method designed to answer a growth-related question. If the country is growing slow or fast, what could be these binding constraints? Right? And this is one point we said last time, I won't go through all, but you can apply this not just for a country, but you can apply this for states within a country. So, China, India, many of the states are very large, and so Bihar is like the 12th largest country, even though it's a state, and it has its own, endemic factors. It's very different from the rest of India in terms of their population being able to be productive, their significant difference in education, and there's a lot of unemployment, so you can apply this methodology to that state or even to an economic sector. Okay, so we did this is the exercise. I don't want to go through this last time. Just like you're trying to figure out, basically you're just trying to figure out what is the syndrome. When a doctor diagnoses a patient, you can see the symptoms, but this is very akin to understanding what do those symptoms imply. Could it be malaria? Could it be typhoid? You're getting chills followed by fever. But what exactly could be the diagnosis? That's the same thing we're doing right now. Okay, so let's just go to, this we did the barrels. Omar, please tell us. We did this practice last time too.
Yeah, okay. Barrels were a little confusing, but
Come on.
so I think what happens is that there are two ways of approaching development problems. One is essentially that, sort of just like the Washington Consensus versus growth diagnostics. The Washington Consensus was like, these are 20 things, we've got to fix all of them, so we're going to give all of them equal attention. And this one basically says that, look, all of them are important, but you need to find the binding constraint, and that's where you're going to start, because that's going to give you the most value for the
Correct. So in this case, what does it say?
It's essentially saying that infrastructure is your biggest issue in the country. So if you focus on infrastructure, it's going to help you the most, and then you can, eventually go on to other things. All that basically says that all those 6 categories are equally important, and you need to give them equal focus.
So in this very good. So in this diagram, you want to remember the substitutes versus complements, right? The substitutes just said that as policymakers, you need to fix whatever you fix. If you fix infrastructure, then your level will rise higher because it'll just go up. I mean, you fix financing, will continue to go up. Here it's saying that the level of water that you have is going to be dependent on that binding constraint. So if you try to fix financing more, it's not going to raise the level. You need to really focus on this first. And that's the complement theory.
Okay, so my question now is, the left side, is it the Washington Consensus?
Okay, so Washington Consensus is right here.
That's sort of like a blues analogy.
Okay. I mean, the Washington Consensus laid out 10 things that every country needs to look at to start with in order to spur its growth. It actually did not specify whether it was complements or substitutes, but the implicit assumption of growth diagnostics is that you want to find something that's more of a binding constraint, so that's more of an issue than the others. So not only are you trying to fix all those things that need to fix, you're trying to ascribe priority and funding to things that are more, because you try to fix this, you'll put more, but you still see that the per capita growth is not going up. Yeah? So this is original Washington Consensus. They said all these things that you need to have, and then there was an augmented consensus saying that you need another 20 things. Now some of this sounds very intuitive, but remember as policymakers, and there's a lot of dimensions, so to have any kind of checklist and then to have parameters and goals by them is always helpful. So if you have these 20 pointers and then you kind of follow up on all of them, it's a great checklist to start with. Otherwise you might be biased to saying, thinking specific areas that you're interested in. And then the strategies, so we talked about 3 specific strategies that came up. But we discussed these last time. Let's just actually go through, and I would love to let's just talk today for a few minutes about 2-3 minutes about Pakistan, Israel, and Nigeria. Okay? I mean, the USFA is,
All right. I get it.
they're definitely, let's keep it. So let's just go back to, I want to go to even the bigger matrix, which comes, sorry, since we've done all of this last time, and camels and hippos too, which we had discussed. Remember this matrix in class that we showed? Okay. So, let's keep this just as a guide, okay? And let's just talk, Omar, just start us off. You started off in Pakistan.
Yeah.
Floor is yours for 3 minutes. Just walk us, if you were to give an overview, at an economic conference and talk about the critical barriers to economic growth in your country, roughly kind of using this theory. what would you say in the first 3 minutes?
Could we go to the more simplified one, or
Okay.
do you have to stick to this?
Yeah, no,
This is
let's
like
just
hard
do that.
It's just a little busy, you know?
We'll do the camera.
Yeah.
It gives you more than,
That's when like I get a job in development policy, I'm like,
Yeah.
for now. Yeah, so I mean to start off, a disclaimer
why
that
don't you come, why don't you like, give
Yeah,
us,
sure.
give it to us as a real policy.
So, I mean, to
Yeah.
start off, as a disclaimer, I don't have any specific data in regards to these things, so I can't speak of numbers. It's more like anecdotal evidence in my experience being in Pakistan, working there for a while. This one summer, nothing compared to you guys, but. So for me, one of the biggest issues in Pakistan is that it's a country of 200 million people, and the fact is that really there are only 2 major cities. So with that kind of urbanization, I think that access to markets is very low. People don't have the opportunity to engage in trade, to assess the market and see what kind of opportunities there are as a businessman, as an entrepreneur. And because of that, you see that, you know, you have a whole bunch of oligarchs in the country who are making progress. The GDP is doing well too. I mean, even in these circumstances, I think the growth is pretty decent. But at the same time, the trickle-down effect isn't that big. I don't know if you know the economist Fernando de Sotomayor. He has this theory about capitalism and capitalism for everyone and economic integration within that. So let's say, for instance, if you're practicing free market, if you're practicing, you know, essentially the ability to rise up in the ranks, the ability to take advantage of economic opportunities should be equal for everyone, whether you're from the lower classes or the upper classes. So in Pakistan's case, I think that I personally believe low returns to economic activity is not an issue, because right now you're seeing a lot of the multinational corporations who are coming in, setting up their own plants, their own factories, with, you know, privatized energy, privatized, you know, mechanisms of hiring labor, and they're so profitable. And there are a lot of them coming in, you know, currently, I think some parts of eastern Punjab and like cities like Sialkot and stuff have a lot of that.
Okay, but so when you say that the low return to economic activity is not a major issue, are you not seeing some of those,
So
you see bad infrastructure,
Yeah,
you see
yeah.
low human capital, because people say Pakistan, you know, we educate, and there is an issue of low human capital.
Yeah, I definitely believe, I think I didn't phrase that properly, because those are issues. But if we're talking about the binding constraint, what at the very essence is not enabling people to progress, not enabling the country to progress, I wouldn't say that bad infrastructure or low human capital are one of them, because I think the country has the capacity to be one of those, you know, really concentrated producers of basic goods. And I think a lot of, especially when it comes to textile and you know, similar things that don't require you to be that sophisticated, and even in terms of agriculture, I'd say. So I think that government failures are an issue to low appropriability to an extent, you can say as well. But
So, Mr. I'm going to stop you one more
yeah,
time. And you know, I've been working as a consultant in different countries, and we found for a lot of policymakers sometimes, there's a sense to use intuition, which I think generally
yeah, which is
tends to
why I
be
had a
right.
disclaimer in the beginning.
And as you know, part of kind of this seminar that we had with Mr. Housman and all, we said that when you're looking for binding constraints, go by based on whether you see, you know, the effect that is mentioned. So if you see bad infrastructure, or if you see low levels of human capital, you ideally don't want to discount that it's not due to low social returns, you know, and due to low returns to economic
Yeah.
activity. So I'm just throwing that out
Yeah,
there,
I mean,
and would love to hear
Okay,
it.
okay. I
yeah.
was gonna throw another example of that, I mean, just very little
So,
that I know
for-
about. Go ahead.
For me, the main concern, I'd say, is the fact that here, there is, I mean, I would say the lack of urbanization in the country is a very, very big issue, because right now that's a problem. You know, there's a lot of political stigma attached to it too, because there's talk about breaking your provinces. Some political parties don't like it, some of them do. And the ethnicity factor comes into play as well. So, and because of that, the fact that there are only 2 main cities, if you look at the funding on a provincial basis that gets allocated to these 2 cities, it's so disproportionate. I mean, it's not even funny. I think Lahore gets 52% of entire Punjab's budget,
Okay.
which is absolutely ridiculous. Punjab is the, you know, they have, I think,
How many
50%.
provinces?
So Pakistan has 4 provinces, and
Punjab.
Balochistan and Sarhad are like, I think, what, 15% of the entire population, so it's mainly Punjab and Sindh.
Well, then Karachi also gets a disproportionate amount.
Yeah, Karachi and Sindh gets a very disproportionate amount, but Karachi, I'd say that it's been an economic hub ever since, you know, the country's inception, so that's still sort of justified. But in Lahore's case, I mean, that's something I've personally been, even though like I have ties to Lahore, I've just been very against it. And
So sorry, one more, you know, the
Yeah.
thing when you think about Karachi, you think about Karachi Electric Supply Company and the history that it had. When you have blackouts for 4 hours, 5 hours a
That's what I was
day,
gonna mention.
how is that not a binding constraint
It's a
for
major economic
I think-
input.
relative? I'm not saying that, I don't know the answer, I'm just throwing, you know, just finance, yeah.
I think with the energy issue in Pakistan, it's a lot of it has to do, it is, I'd say, I would even argue that it can be a binding constraint too.
Yeah.
But I think the problem isn't that it's not there. The problem is that, you know, nobody is willing to take the political initiative of having a pipeline with Iran or with Central Asia coming in because of political reasons right now. For instance, when I was there in the summer, the guy from USAID came in. And he was an HKS grad too, and he gave us a presentation about what the energy issues are. And he was like, you know, on a personal level, I know that the option of, you know, having energy coming in, you know, having a pipeline with Iran is the most feasible thing. And it would cost us the same that we're locally, you know, whatever plants Pakistan has, the local production is equal to the one if you get it from Iran. But because of US and Iran tensions, that is something the USAID is not, you know, letting the country do. And right now there are talks going on again, and they've actually passed the bill, the Zardari just said it before he left presidency, that they're going to have the pipeline coming, but again, I don't see it happening in the next 3 to 4
Okay,
years.
so one, right, we have the 2 minutes before the finance minister of Nigeria is going to come on, so please give us your final, your summary of the
So
binding
my summary,
constraints.
I'd say, is basically to really allow the lower, you know, the lower classes of society to come up. You need to have a higher dispersion of capital centers, more access to markets, especially because I look at it this way. A lot of the places that are currently facing, you know, terrorism, Waziristan and, you know, places in Sarhad, their main problem is that they're really so detached from cities, and they've been so for so long now that they haven't really been able to evolve on a, you know, so this is like an added benefit. You can talk about it as like an anthropological externality. But like instead of focusing on political integration, the focus should be on economic integration for the entire country.
Great, and Mr. Phillips from the USAID, if you were to ask funding in one area over here, what area would you ask?
I'd say, let's see. So I'm coming from like a very basic background, and something that I firmly believe is that there is not enough innovation in the public sector. Is that people are going with too idealized of perspectives, and they want to use the same exact thing over and over again. I think that there should be a special focus on using innovative measures, let's say solve the energy problem or solve the urbanization problem in Pakistan.
Entrepreneurial measures.
Yeah, entrepreneurial measures, you know, promoting very small businesses at the local scale, not in the major cities. Instead of being like, you know, we need those corporations or we need those oligarchs, I think it should be focused more on the lower levels.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Owen. Thank you.
I think this proportionate
Right?
share of money is going to Surmat Felicia as well, that's one.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right before Nigeria comes on, India is going to take a 30-second demonstration of kind of how they did their presentation. And so when we talk about India, we do believe that there's no private investment in entrepreneurship in general that can be spurred by this model to create economic growth. If you go down these branches, when we start with the low returns to economic activity, we feel that there is very low appropriability. By appropriability, we mean the ability of creators of value to appropriate the funds that they deserve. And this is a function of things like, you know, property rights, is there litigation, is there enforcement, people who are innovative, can they get their rewards? And for a long time, because of court cases going on for many years and kind of the whole system that was against business, there was an anti-appropriability and anti-business sentiment relative to our benchmarks. So we do feel, if I had to allocate points between the next levels of issues, I would probably put 50 points here for India, and low appropriability implies within market failures that there are some externalities, and to some extent there's coordination externalities, but a lot of it is information externalities. And in terms of government failures, we have a democracy, and I feel there are more micro risks, especially corruption, which, as you will see, you know, it's an endemic issue in many of our countries. And in terms of macro risk, there has been much more stability than in the past. But just using this model, yeah. Our human capital is also varied. We have a whole set of cadre of people who are amongst the best trained in the world, but they are concentrated in a few industries. But the average education level for the country is still quite low. It's high in certain states. In the state of Kerala, we have very high literacy. And again, when you think of India, think of Africa or Europe, same number of people or more number of people, but each state is like a country, right? So when we talk about Kerala, Bihar, it's I mean, they're large spaces within their own selves. So there can be better improvement in terms of variability, and yes, infrastructure overall, there is a need for more roads, for just more construction. We see a lot of that, but it's focused in urban areas. So again, this is getting a disproportionate amount of growth in terms of inclusive per capita growth. We will see overall income levels go up, per capita go up, but I'm concerned about equality there.
I have just a question for India.
Yes.
I mean, you know, if you compare India with China, that they have the policy of one child per family, would you see that this could be a kind of binding constraint for in the case of India? I know that it's a democracy and you cannot, you know, just obligate people to have one child in the case of China, but can you see this low decrease in population that can be something?
Okay, so this gets into another, but just my 2 cents on this. One is they say, like in classic development economics we've seen in India, they say development turns out to be the best contraception, in that the higher levels of education and as income goes up, within India too you see that there's less children, and actually the ones who are at lower levels of income have the most children. I think it's going to be very, very difficult, and almost if not impossible right now, to have anything close to a mandatory policy. In the 70s, India had the largest family planning program in the world, but it was always kind of pull and not push. So it was like, you know, condo promotion, there was like family planning kind of education. Do I feel population is the binding constraint of this country? Yes, I mean, at a macro level, I feel everything that I mean, when you just have more people and this kind of growth, I would say it's the one causing everything, including corruption, you know, so just less money to provide, you know, and then there's traditions that just feed on each other, that because of so many people you can escape in terms of compensating politicians more. So it is a problem. Economically, it shows up in different branches. And just the last thing, in 10 seconds, in terms of high cost of finance, the cost has come down quite a bit. Credit markets, a lot of global organizations have come in general. Credit is much easier to get than before. It is still high, not as high as certain countries, and we heard in Madagascar it would be like 30-odd%. But because of the international attention that India and China have received, it's less of an issue. Microcredit, though, continues to again have its own variability. So there's a lot of competition at the higher funding levels, but to really again get inclusive growth, we need to have microcredit. So there is still reasonably considered high risk and a moderate cost in terms of
microcredit. Is that microfinance? Is that
yeah, microfinance. Basically getting people in rural areas smaller sums of monies out, and
focused direction.
we have things like self-help groups and so forth, but it just needs to scale up. That's a very kind of.
So I appreciated, by the way, during class, he actually, I assume you communicated to him to do a little more of the traditional economics right on board. And I mean, because it does help when you're talking about what seem to be sort of high-level conceptual, like, I mean, this is great and all, but until you delve into some of the savings investments related economics of it all, I don't think it really plays as well.
Right.
You can see it. So
Yeah, I think some of his style is also, like we said, like just to also talk and just to ask students to react.
Yeah.
And the press has been incredibly,
yeah.
you know, open to trying, so we're pushing on that. But for timing today, we will just go with Nigeria, and then can we have Israel next week?
Yeah.
Will you be there next week?
I'm not sure, but
You were the finance minister of Nigeria?
Or the planning commission?
She's the,
No, that's her role.
she's
right?
the oil
It's
czar.
like-
She's the oil czar. Sardinia.
Well, I'm not a guru on finance and economics, but I can talk with respect to what I've been reading about my country. Yeah, Nigeria is in trouble.
You should also explain that you've not lived there for a number of years, right? I mean,
See, I haven't lived there, but I go there every year,
Okay.
and I keep up with the news and everything. So, for Nigeria, no return to economic activity, it's really a big problem for us. That's part of the reason why we're having low growth and all that. Because we could see that when you go to the low social returns, we have very low human capital. I mean, our problems are similar with that of India, but I think ours is at a much more serious level because we are not one of the BRICS. You understand? So we have low human capital. Let me start with this place. Based on the fact that, yes, we are educated, a lot of educated people are in my country. But the question is, there's a recent article that Nigeria is turning out illiterate graduates. And when you say illiterate graduates, what happens in school, how people get their certificates and graduates, it's a problem. They don't really go through the rigors that we're going through here.
As you do your
You know,
presentation.
they don't really go through the
Cover a little bit.
rigors that we're going through here and have to do the test and all that. In my country, people do tests for people to pass.
And
So
they're
that's why
non-employable.
unemployable. And also that's why they call them the graduate illiterates. That
Can you
they're
move it to the
trying
light a
out.
little bit, because I have a.
Based on
dim-
that,
okay.
based on
The
that,
press reporters.
based on that, we have no human capital.
Yes, straight to
And
Facebook.
also there are no jobs. Then when you talk about bad infrastructure, this is the major problem that we have. You guys, I'm sure you must have heard about when the president tried to remove the oil subsidy
Yeah.
and also, throw people in the dark. But the problem is, how do you remove oil subsidy when everything is tied to the price of fuel in Nigeria? So if you don't have good roads to transport all the foods, like from one country, from one point to the other, everything is tied to the price of fuel.
What is the percentage of oil as a total percentage of economy's exports?
It's about, what the reserves we get from oil is about 90%.
Wow.
Very high reliance.
Wow.
So,
90%?
yeah, we're really, really dependent on this oil.
I think
Uh,
you're saying
really?
in class, you're like one.
Well, because she and I were in Megan Sullivan's class together, where we did a simulation of Pakistan's energy situation with a very developed model, right? And we didn't do it. It's a little bit of an OPEC simulation, and I represented Nigeria, so I learned a little, but I did not know it was that high. That's,
Yeah, it was that high. because
but
that
they
was
are they're also restricting their supply tremendously because of the OPEC cartel
because of the OPEC.
dictating how they have to behave, and they could be making so much more money on their oil, and they don't. So that's weird.
And when we talk about
That's a
going
binding-
into the
It's a
oil,
binding constraint.
we're looking into all these micro risks where corruption is the major. In fact, as we speak right now, next week, a lot of people are coming together on the 9th of April to march against corruption in Nigeria.
Wow.
Yes, because, I don't even know where to begin. There's a whole lot of issue on its own. The extractive industry, there's not, in the energy, there's no transparency. This subsidy we are talking about goes, there's what we call the cartel. These are the people that are into this. You have like 440 companies who transport, because we have crude oil, but what happens is that these people come and develop this crude oil, then they export it to a foreign,
China.
all
No
foreign countries
refineries.
for refining. When they refine
China.
it, they now import it back. So it's like we
Yeah.
get our crude oil,
I know.
we export it for refining, and we refine it, we import it back. This is where the subsidy comes in.
Oh, I
And the
see.
people that are into taking it back and forth, some of them don't do anything yet, they submit quotas, submit bills that they've done.
Why doesn't Nigeria have its own refinery
Yeah, that's like.
infrastructure? That's
You need
ridiculous.
foreign
Then
capital.
it still
That's
goes-
corruption.
It still goes back to the cartel that I'm telling you about, because they know that once we get our refineries, we have like about 4 or 5. Once we get it working and producing at the maximum production and all that, they are not going to have jobs. They are not going to have places where they can make money and all that. So that's not the only issue. We also have like low appropriability through government failures. The government has failed us in so many ways. We've gotten our independence since 1960. In the early 70s and 80s, especially in the 70s when we found oil, we had what we call the oil boom. We had a lot of money and all that. But what has the government done with the money? Nothing.
It seems like, that's where you get into, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but while we're talking about it,
Yeah.
the risks and the government failures, that's where rule of law, these sorts of things, these institutional controls need to come in that don't, and again, not as easy as just exporting the US or the UK institutions, not as easy at all, but it does seem like, in the case of Nigeria, it's hard to not point to corruption as the main culprit.
There's just no way.
There's just no way, there's too much opportunity there.
We've been cursed with bad rulers.
So this financial and
Resource
monetary
risks.
macro
Resource
risks,
The resource course.
And then macro risks also, you'd say they're pretty large in terms of financial, monetary.
Yeah, how does that work there?
When you talk about the financial, monetary, and fiscal, what exactly?
That's like macro tools that the
Yeah.
US would use. So in the case of
You
like,
see, when you talk about all these macro issues and.
well, here's an example. So the question is central banking. So Nigeria has to have a central bank.
Okay,
and so,
I was going to talk about that, but I thought I was going to talk
Inflation.
about it in high cost of finance and all those things. But then again, when we talk about the banks, right? Yes, we do have inflation. Inflation is very high. And also sometimes what the government does is like they hit a lot of banks with all this stabilization security. What they, like mop up a lot of money in the system. Like all these banks, you have to pay this millions of dollars to pay this, and central bank gets the money back to limit the amount of money in circulation to bring down the inflation. Now, with the banking industry, that is another area where, see, we don't have like good banking system. We do have good banking system, but the thing is this, the people that are in charge, like the chairman, the directors of the bank, they are the ones that come to take the loans. You know, you bring in money, you see like at some point, two years ago, the central bank governor got a lot of bank directors and put them in jail. You understand? Because they took a lot of loans money from all these people, they collected their money and they have not paid back. So it's like the banking system is not strong. But even though a few of them are strong, at some point the government...
So default is high, default risk is
Yeah,
high.
default risk is high, and at some point they have to come up with the fact that you have to bring serious collateral before they can give you money. Even right now, the banks
And that's
are
a problem because national savings is probably low.
Yeah,
Yes.
what is the, let's talk about finance, what is the savings rate and,
The savings rate is very low, and the cost of borrowing money is very high.
Yeah.
that makes
So
sense.
I remember
Most
the-
African countries have the.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I remember I had gone to Nigeria to see if I can buy a property, and they told me that if I have the funds, it's better for me to use my own funds rather than take money from the bank, because the interest rate is going to be so astronomical. By the time I finish paying, it's like doubling the amount and all that. So they have not, and also with what has gone on, it's, you know, like people putting money in the bank and maybe a chairman or a director of the bank taking the money to go and set up a company and not pay back. So because of that, banks are very reticent.
While you're talking, I'm just going to graph this because I just want to know from your perspective. I mean, I know we're running out of time, but like, keep talking.
Same
So,
last, yeah.
Then what else do we?
The investment and the saving.
So is this where they are? They're over here on this part. I mean, they've got very low savings, or a very high cost of investment, very low savings. But
No, I think
You're
that
right.
you have a low,
Right, so it's just-
low
it's
quantity
just
of
okay.
investment.
it
but
could be
high-
anywhere in here though,
yeah.
right? I mean, it could be. But I guess what I'm wondering is like, does this function the way would you analyze this chart graph as the same way you would with supply and demand curves with like dead weight loss to society? Does that enter into the
Yeah, I
equation?
mean, whenever, yeah, that is a dead weight
That's
loss
a
when you
dead
don't
weight,
have.
Yeah. What does that suggest though with regard, it just means that it's not operating nearly
I mean,
efficiently
what
enough.
you're basically saying with the deadweight loss is that if you are efficient, all that deadweight loss area, I mean, would represent how much added benefit you have on capital allocation in the economy.
But you're saying your savings rate is down here, your investment rate's up here,
Yeah.
and therefore there's a ton of dead weight loss.
When you say
because of it.
savings, yeah, so
Yeah.
that's,
Interesting, okay, yeah, I mean,
So, and by the way, so the
that's
interest,
let's talk offline because it's separate. You're talking
Yeah.
about the demand and supply for savings
Yeah.
separately and the demand and supply for investment. So, I don't think it's captured in this graph.
okay, you can't do that like that in this.
Yeah.
But you can do this graph on the macro, if that's your investment curve and you're doing supply of money, if you're doing fiscal analysis, like the supply of money would be, you know, a vertical curve that intersects the investment at that R, correct? It would be up and down as that line shows right there.
Yeah, I mean, this is saying two things. The lower the interest rate, the more the investment because people are ready to invest more, right?
Right,
And the same thing is the lower the interest rate that households get, right?
Right.
The less they want to
right,
invest.
right.
yeah, and the other
Right,
thing
okay.
is,
Okay.
he's right about the graph because I think you're trying to combine two different graphs into one graph. Because we're, like, I mean, our 24/7 assumption is that it's always at equilibrium.
Right, that's
So,
the.
yeah, you use, I mean,
But it's
basically, I
not.
think what you do is that you change the labels of the axis, then you have two separate graphs, one focusing on investment, one focusing on savings.
Mhm.
And then we
Yeah,
have
sorry.
also the issues of taxes.
Mm.
Government is not collecting enough taxes.
Yes, same thing with the,
Yes, they
yeah.
are not collecting because, I mean, people have a way of avoiding tax, not like in the United States here, where at least you get a good number of people to pay tax. In my country, no. Also, there's an issue of capital flight.
Yeah.
A lot of rich people don't save in Nigeria.
Because of this instability, right?
Yes,
They're-
because of
they're
the instability,
unsure
yeah.
whether they should, right? Because they're getting much higher interest rates. If you want to look
Yeah.
into like
So
fixed
there's-
income securities, it's much higher. But people are still not investing in Nigeria.
They're not very invested in Nigeria.
Because I mean, at one level there might be bank run, but that's extreme. But two, it also deficits might change your currency fluctuations, right? And then yeah, there's other macro risks too. So yeah, so even though you're getting high finance, it's ridiculous people don't invest. Now that's not the case in India though. people are, I mean, there isn't, because of the financial sector here, there is a very low probability of not getting your funds back, or of currency fluctuations being so much that you don't get different. So that's why the spread is much lower. So.
Lower. See, in my country, everything, like other places where the private industry is booming, my country, everybody depends on the government. Government is where the money comes from. So whatever you do, you're looking to the government and all that. Then, like I said, this high cost, this area, I really don't know much about the banking and all that.
Yeah, you know what is the official rate? Like if you want to go out and get a loan, like if a consumer, what is it, like 20%?
No, it's about 20 something percent.
Yeah.
It's about 20
So
something.
from a policy point of view, let's say that, you're in a policy or a consultant point of view, and you need to find it by binding constraint, just one. I know that is tough, and you need to decide maybe between low human capital that you mentioned that is very important, bad infrastructure that you mentioned also that there you don't have enough refineries, or maybe you don't have enough roads or transportation system, or corruption. And you need to focus. I mean that some of them they are related, and it's maybe a very simplistic answer. But if you would have to focus on just one, which one you would choose?
Coming from my own background as a financial crime specialist, I will focus on corruption. And because based on the fact that we generate a lot of our resources, like our foreign reserves and everything, we generate it through our oil. And if the resources from our oil is managed very well, it will fix infrastructure, it will fix these problems of low human capital, because even the schools, they don't have good teachers and don't have good things that you can use to. So
if people want steal money, and they will use, even though that maybe wouldn't be enough, they will, put this money in the right places, like education and infrastructure.
I have a question. I mean, you guys have policy experience. My understanding always was that corruption is something that you can't tackle directly. It's more like an indirect consequence that once you have more money, people are more powerful in the public. Once that happens, institutions generally get stronger because people want rights. And once that happens, there's more accountability for politicians too. But like, since you're saying the binding constraint is corruption, if you were to be a policymaker, how do you stop corruption?
Yeah, when those at the top of corruption,
you
they're
see,
constantly
It's hard to take it,
because even while I was in that field, they've always said that no, what you can do is, it doesn't take, it's not just the government who solve corruption, it takes the collective will of the whole people, like you just mentioned now, and also to get international organizations to put a lot of pressure within the Nigerian system for them to change some of their laws.
Does that ever work though? International pressure?
Well, conditionality requirements.
It's like just
Funding,
recently, my
I mean, you believe that there is, if it's a good government. I mean, all these things have a political angle, but any money can make a difference, right? So you have more research, you have someone who wants to make a difference, you have a policy person investing in a bigger police force, in kind of making legislation that penalizes, you further for corruption. That is to some extent a little bit of a platform of what Indian governments have done. They've been able to push the envelope. But it's such an endemic thing politically, the people who get elected have come through this route, so it's harder. But I think all of these things, there is an element that money can buy low-hanging fruit that you can control. But it is one of the more complex issues.
And I would say that in the case of.
And I don't think that foreign companies, they care about this issue. They just want,
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if you see what Shell is going through in my country right now.
I don't know.
Well, the sad part is that in countries like Nigeria and very likely Saudi Arabia, where they're sitting on just ridiculous amounts of wealth through oil, because of OPEC, because of the cartel, because of restriction of supply, they're making money through the restriction of supply at a rate. But it's going to be the undoing of these countries too. At the same time, you can only be corrupt for so long and not spread the wealth and not build a real economy before the entire thing comes undone. I mean, you just,
It's still the same thing we're talking about, the resource cost.
Yeah.
That eventually leads to.
Saudi Arabia is going to be hurting so badly. I mean, but it's always living for the now.
Saudi is actually sad. I mean, in Kuwait's case, okay, I shouldn't say this.
Sorry, I know this is going off the rails a little bit.
No, like in Kuwait's case, I was raised there. What happens is that sure, the government is rich and they're sitting on oil, but they make sure their population is really well. So every Kuwaiti gets per kid, $1,500 a month. Raise them, and every kid who has above a 2.5 GPA, they get a full right to any university they get in outside Kuwait. So their population is very, very, very well.
What is the
off.
population of Kuwait?
less than 1 million.
That's the
Correct.
one, it's very,
Yeah,
very
it's
small.
not-
Nigeria is.
Yeah,
I mean, they
It's
get
160
voted.
million.
Yeah, that's where
So,
you.
you see,
Compare
somebody
that to-
in my energy class, just the last class that I had, somebody came from San Francisco, you know, I was saying something about how the better way to manage this oil wealth is the resources you get from oil, you distribute it amongst the people, give it to the people, oil to cash, and then tax them.
Yes.
So that the money can get it back. So these people have been going about,
Interesting.
you know, trying to do this and citing example of Alaska, how it has worked in Alaska, and then how they could use it to work on Equatorial Guinea. I don't even know about Equatorial Guinea. That happens to be, they said, it's the richest country in Africa and
Wow.
even Latin America right now, you know. But you
So
see,
they're holding some back, right, for
They're
infrastructure
not holding
projects,
some back,
but then they're giving
yeah.
revenue to, okay.
But you see,
Yeah, but they are spreading like all the wealth from the oil to the citizens.
to the citizens, and then tax the citizens.
And then they're creating more money through taxes.
Through taxes and all that.
And
But
they
then
can
again,
prevent-
it can work in some countries, but not in every country.
Honestly-
So definitely not, it's not gonna work.
I mean, in Saudi, the condition is just so sad. I mean, I've been there quite a few times, and their local Saudi citizens are poor. I mean, they're impoverished. Like they're you know, they barely have a job, and they're trying to meet like basic expenses, and the country is like,
And the top brass is completely,
yeah,
it's just,
it has one of
talk
the
about
highest
1%,
per
it's
capita
like,
GDPs in the world, and you're just like, I can't reconcile. I mean, so the case in Kuwait is like, okay, the foreign immigrants from like Bangladesh, Pakistan, India would be very, you know, not that well off. But like in Saudi, it's their own citizens that, and they're so.
and it's better for them to keep them poor enough to not be able to raise, you know, it's.
It's the same thing. I mean, in Pakistan,
Anyway,
there's
this is
something
interesting.
because there's no land reform in Pakistan. You see the same thing happening wherever you see landlords and things like that. So
Yeah.
these are like oil lords essentially. Who use you know the oil to like.
And one of the other problems that they are based just in islands, right? So, you know, even now, you're not rich, you're not a rich country, but you're at least having soil.
Even like health, you know, HIV and all is now, Nigeria has the second largest population in the world that has HIV. You know,
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's more than India now. India was number 2.
Wow.
And
Say again, what was the?
South Africa has the highest number of people with HIV. Nigeria is
Is that right?
number 2 in the world.
Wow.
India
Wow.
had more
When did
than
you get these statistics? Recently?
No, I mean, this is actually about 3 years ago that they went about India. So it's about 3 million people who have HIV. I worked in Quinton Foundation, this is our field, so it's a,
I don't blame them because they're not very hardworking. Not that they're not hardworking people, and I don't want to sound sexist here. The men, once they get off from work, you know what they do? They get off like around 4, 5, and before they come home like around 12 at night. So between that 5 and 12, what were they doing with the time?
The men
Yes,
and
that's fine.
Nigerian men?
And there's a lot of promiscuity going on in my country.
Yeah.
I can say that.
So Mayor, do you have a private sector background or do you have even public sector throughout?
No, I've had both. I worked in management consulting and then where I was managing the Clinton Foundation, HIV AIDS initiative in India.
Okay.
And then I was TV anchor at both business and private and public. So
famous guy, I did.
I think you guys saw you
Yeah, we saw your World Cup analysis.
like 4 years ago or something.
It was like,
Even a
I've
guy
seen
in the
this
TV
guy.
we were watching in Harvard like separately.
Yeah, like, we were streaming it
Really?
on like an Indian channel, and I was like, when the first day he was like on the TV, I'm like, I've seen this guy somewhere, and I like really remember him, but I can't recall it. And it took me a while to figure it out.
That is,
Anyway, can we have a round of applause for
Oh,
yes. from Nigeria
Oh,
and
yes.
then Pakistan? Let's enjoy some choral call.
let's go do
Continue
it.
as next
Yeah,
time.
I'm a Pakistan.
I'm not
India,
Pakistan.
this January.
Yeah, see, people go to India, they don't come to
We
Pakistan.
talked about that. No, we almost went there because we got all the way to Dharamsala.
So
Oh,
you
nice,
were
nice.
And they were
assigned
talking
to
about the
Yeah,
jungle.
for-
Yeah.
Yeah, also the things.
Which one?
Oh yeah,
All
it's an
both
interesting
the,
place.
the
Very
Olympics and-
polarized,
Cool.
very ethnically different.
Yeah, I've seen some of your stuff
Yes.
on, well, okay.
Yeah, it's very
The stock
population is-
analysis.